It's a great pleasure to welcome Lisa Bottomley today. I don't think she needs any introduction, but Lisa brings such a wealth of practical classroom experience as well as curriculum expertise to us today and to her role as Learning Area Manager for English. She also shares our passion for literature, and I think if we listen very, very carefully, we might hopefully hear some snatches of poetry, the odd quotation, because she can reel them off, which is such a gift. Certainly, I think she's been, I'm sure you'll agree, she's been such a steady, reassuring and inspiring presence for all of us as we edge ever so closely to IS&Gs, TLAPs, set text lists, etc., etc. So we're looking forward to all your insights. Would you please make Lisa very welcome?
Thanks, Joanna, and thank you to you all. Joanna knows me very well, so do listen out as we proceed through today. So, first of all, thank you for joining me. I'm hoping by the end of the session you're not all wanting to go and become truck drivers, and that you're feeling that the thinking that you've done so far is thinking that you can continue to do and it can find a purposeful outcome. We are delighted to be here working with ETAC, and in fact the program that ETAC have run this year for their Vision 2020 has been extraordinarily helpful and supportive of our English teachers in the state, and we are very pleased to be able to have that great relationship with them where we can keep building people's capacity as we move towards implementation. So we're looking today at an overview of our Unit 4, and as we come, even in this busy time in schools, towards the pointy end of implementation. The slides that go up today will be available to ETAC after today, but I do realise sometimes people see something and it has an aha moment and they want to take a photo or whatever, but these will be available, particularly if you want to look at them afterwards. The session is also being recorded, so I have dual microphones, one for the camera recording at the back and one for the room. So you can again, of course, review this after today. As we begin, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, and we acknowledge their elders, past, present and emerging. As educators, we particularly value the rich contributions that they bring to our experiences and our culture. I'm here in the stead of Ellen Connolly, who many of you would have met when you were doing your syllabus PD implementation workshops. Ellen is ironically very busy at the moment with developing mock assessments for the literature external examination and also English and literature extension. So Ellen is the principal officer. I am the learning area manager for English and languages at the QCAA. So as we begin, let's find out, and if you've been to a syllabus implementation workshop, you're probably already aware of this little activity. Let's have a show of hands about a few key things so that I can find out who's in the room with me. Who's read Literature 2019? Don't worry, nothing falls on the sky on you if you haven't. It's all okay. EAL 2019? English? Who's been to a workshop? But I realise some of you may not have been to a literature one, so there may be some people in the room who are looking for that scope of the whole course. Who in their schools is planning to offer literature from next year? Fantastic. And then EAL or English, we know EAL is less commonly taught. English is obviously the main one. Could I ask a question though for my own curiosity? If you're offering that from the suite, who is offering literature on its own line apart? It's not on the same line as English. And who's offering it on the same line as English? Okay, so that's I know that's a school planning thing, but that's interesting. Who started their Unit 4 literature planning? Now, don't worry about that one. Units 1, 2 and 3 come first, and I'm sure that's where your current thinking and your current energy is going after you've finished all of the responsibilities of your current Term 4 workload. And this one, though, you may be more in that space. Who's selected their prescribed texts? For the course, maybe Unit 4. I think the lunchtime soiree chat about text is a fantastic opportunity. It's often in our anecdotal chatting that we actually really get those aha moments from each other. So it's a really good opportunity to go and maybe explore how people might be looking at implementing that text in their school. So the session today, we're looking at where Unit 4 fits in the course of study, and the focus of what we're doing is to help you inform your planning and your assessment design, as well as no doubt what you will share with your colleagues in terms of the understandings that you gain here today. Sometimes we see Unit 4 as that unit that sits with external assessment. Yes, that's true, but it is also much more than that. There are many resources available to you on the QCAA portal, and the portal can transport you to a new dimension anytime you want, and we are gradually and continually releasing things through that space. So let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky, and let's come into Unit 4 and look at it in terms of what is Unit 4 looking at and what is it about. So Unit 4, the title of the unit, is obviously this independent explorations. So it is the culminating unit of a course of study. The subject matter, as I think my pointer is working, yes, the subject matter, and we'll look a little bit more at that later, is those three interconnected ideas. And there are two pieces of assessment. One, IA3, the summative internal assessment, is set by you in your schools, and it's an imaginative written response. And it will be subject to those processes of endorsement and confirmation. The final piece of assessment, the external assessment, is set by the QCAA and marked by the QCAA. But everything that you do prior to this point in time helps students to succeed in this unit. It is also important to point out that this final unit in literature is very similar to the shape of the EAL Unit 4 and the English Unit 4. There's a strong alignment across those three syllabus, the suite of syllabuses. So what's Unit 4 to the course of study? Where does it fit other than at the end? What is its role? What will students bring with them to the unit? What will be the skills and strategies that they have in their toolkit as they arrive with you? Who or what will be the literature student when they finish that final exam in 2020? Our rationale really helps you here in terms of thinking about what is it that literature focuses on. There are 21st century skills obviously embedded in that statement. And we would really encourage you with your students early, when you encounter them early in Unit 1, to actually look at the rationale with them and to explore the concepts that underpin the whole syllabus. I'm going to focus for a moment on one aspect of that rationale, and that's the little piece that we have there highlighted in blue, as we might with our students in the classroom. And I'm going to look at that concept, which we find often people exploring in the wider world. And I'm going to go actually to one of the poets on the prescribed text list, Ellen van Neerven. Her words in one of her poems, Whole Lot, are, "What we eat comes from our roots. If we stop sharing, there will be nothing." In terms of the rationale, it's not hard to see how that quotation connects back to the rationale, as we'll unpack across this session today. In their critical and creative engagement with literary texts, through reading, thinking, talking and writing, an internal and external assessment, our students will share and develop and connect as independent, innovative and creative learners and thinkers. If you've been to a syllabus implementation workshop, I know you've seen this before, but let's just take a moment for those people who maybe didn't have that opportunity. Literature, like our other general English courses, EAL and English, is a 4-unit course. And by And if you look at this map of the 4 units, what we can see is that as the course develops, one thing stays the same across all units. What changes is the first 2 bullet points. So in every unit of the course, students are creating both analytical and imaginative texts, and those 2 types of texts only. If we look at the first 2 bullet points, they change as the course progresses, and we see that their work becomes increasingly more complex. The course is developmental. By Unit 4, students have developed in their capacity to analyse the types of interpretations of literary texts that students are expected to produce change in focus and complexity throughout the course. As they progress, they will develop more informed, complex, exploratory and creative interpretations supported by a closer and more detailed reading of a literary text and others' interpretations of it. They will be achieving what James Macaulay, another poet on our text list, writes of in his poem Credo, as they make the meaning not ours, but found in the mind, deeply submissive to the grammar of existence, the syntax of the real, so that alien is changed to human, thing into thinking. One of the things that we've tried to do in our TLAPs is to encourage that capacity building across the 4-unit course. And one of the members of our literature writing team made the suggestion, and it's a really good one in terms of thinking about that growth over the 4 units. And I'll share it with you today. In Unit 1, have the students write a letter to themselves, we often do that in our classes anyway, about what they think they will gain, learn, experience in this subject literature, and give that letter back to them at the very start of Unit 4, in this culminating unit of the course, and have them reflect on the ways that they have learned and the ways that their community, the classroom community, has come together. So in terms also of looking at Unit 4 to the course of study, it's important to consider its contribution to the students' development and demonstration of the underpinning factors, including literacy. And I'll actually, I hope, connect back to what we heard Kathy talking about this morning. So this is a section from the syllabus, which many of you will have read, which is the literacy statement. But I've highlighted there that key term about students will apply, extend and refine their repertoire of literacy skills and practices. Those practices will begin in Unit 1 and will develop as they proceed. And I have brought with me 2 texts which might help you as part of that development of their thinking and understanding. One of them you're probably quite familiar with, and many of you will actually already have Kate Grenville's The Writing Book with you, but it has in it a series of activities as well as obviously exploration and conversation around particularly the key elements of narrative. So, and great classroom activities which are terrific as well. This one may be less familiar to you. Francine Prose is an American writer, and her book, Reading Like a Writer, actually entirely encapsulates what the syllabus of literature is about. Particularly for imaginative work, this is a fantastic thing to have in your teacher toolkit and read sections of it to your students. I just thought I'd share with you a little bit from her chapter on dialogue today. In terms of looking at students, this idea of refining our repertoire of skills. So writing dialogue. Her advice? Ranting is another thing that should be done sparingly in literature, as in life, with an eye as to why and how long a reader will stay interested in a character who just keeps on talking. People, we notice, tend to rant when they are in control and don't care much about the approval of the people to whom they're ranting. And that's actually a little lesson for life as well, isn't it? But the lovely thing about her book is she actually, as she goes, refers to huge works of literature, many, many, very broad range, and she links back to literary texts, of course, the focus of our subject, literature. So we're going to look a little bit more closely now about what is specific to Unit 4 and also to look at some of the time frames and frameworks of the QCAA which may inform some of your planning and some of your development of that unit. So as you go into Unit 4, obviously as a teacher, you'll be thinking about what's come before, the teaching learning assessment that students have previously experienced. As we know, and as was actually reaffirmed again, obviously by Kathy this morning, that across Units 3 and 4, there are 4 pieces of assessment, 3 which are internal and 1 which is external. People will have made choices from the prescribed text list to inform that teaching and learning. And but we've also had that important development of TLAPs, teaching, learning and assessment plans, which have embedded the syllabus objectives and the subject matter all the way through the course. So that by the time the students are with us in Unit 4, they have been on a journey, and that journey has brought them to this place. However, what's specific to Unit 4? And I've just, I can't wander too far because I already am too wide by too many things here. What is specific to Unit 4, and I've highlighted the key term that emerges, that students demonstrate increasing independence in those things. There are 2 types of activities for teaching and learning. There's creative, we're looking towards the creative aesthetic, and then we're looking at critical responses. So, but the key word is independent. So by Unit 4, they obviously still really need you, but as facilitator of their learning. They should also be able to arrive at their own interpretations based on solid exposure to other people's interpretations as they inform their own. The syllabus states that up to and including this point, students should have engaged with a wide range of texts to encourage their development as language learners and users, that students have read widely across the course. The close study of text should not be alarming to them. It should be really familiar by this final unit of the course, and they should be aware that insight, analysis and creation is everywhere around our world. And I'd like to actually share with you the words of the British poet Kate Tempest, who, guess what, is also on the prescribed text list. And it's an excerpt from her poem, "Let Them Eat Chaos." At any moment in the middle of a city, there's a million epiphanies occurring in the blurring of the world behind the curtain and the world within the person. That's what they should be like by Unit 4. Tempest's poem reinforces that the relationship between creative responses and critical responses is not mutually exclusive. We know that, as the syllabus states, the experience of reading aesthetic texts and the experience of writing them are closely related. The more students engage with the aesthetic dimension of texts, the more they learn to read with their own writing in mind and write with their reader in mind. And so in Unit 4, they read and analyse others' texts and experiment with aesthetic in their own. They should feel confident by now that they can both manipulate the aesthetic and pull it apart. That should be what they want to do and be able to do at this point in time. So what's Unit 4 centred on? These are the objectives of Unit 4. You'll note they're the same 11 objectives that underpin all of the syllabus, so students have had much prior exposure to them already. They also are the same objectives should you have students who are doing English and literature that they're also engaging with. What is really interesting, and actually great little activity early on, back in that backwards mapping thing, have the students look at the 11 objectives and see what are frequently occurring words that come up in those objectives. We've all been talking for a while about cognitive verbs, and I think everybody's already on that page about that idea of making the objectives clear and well known to students. But if you pull all these apart, a word does come up fairly frequently. Do you know what it is? It's purpose. Or purposes. So it's the frequently occurring word of these objectives. Obviously, we're talking about assessment literacy as well for our students, that they understand what the objectives ask them to do. And for example, analyse, that they have, and that's actually what Kathy was talking about this morning, that understanding, obviously, definitionally, of some key terms. The QCAA has just recently released the resources to support schools in terms of that cognitive understanding, and it's called the Cognitive Verb Toolkit, and provides useful fact sheets that you can use obviously at a departmental level but also with students. Assessment literacy though is also conceptual, and our students actually should engage with the definitional level of aesthetic features and stylistic devices as is evident in the syllabus. Embed their understanding of these concepts in teaching and learning, but also take them to the syllabus to explore what the syllabus says about those key concepts. So at this point, we're thinking at Unit 4, we're going, okay, there's creative response, there's a critical response, I need to know about the objectives, I need to know about aesthetic features and stylistic devices, and I need to embed all that into my teaching and learning. And before you rush off to become a truck driver, of course, there's also this bit of the puzzle as well. And I know that these dates have actually already been released and many of you would have seen them, but there will be some people here who have not. So some of our teaching and learning and planning for Unit 4 is centred on these dates. The column that everybody will be really interested in is this one here, because that's when, as a teacher in a school, you'll be submitting work through the portal to the QCAA. So there's endorsement of 1 and 2 together. Endorsement instruments 1 and 2 are sent in together, due by the 16th of August next year. Wow, we're already less than a year from that. And then IA3 is due for endorsement in January 2020. Your first confirmation event occurs just after that 20th of March submission date in 2020, and then IA2 and IA3 are sent off for confirmation. Submission in schools by the 21st of August. And then at the bottom, we obviously have external assessment in Term 4. It's anticipated that the external assessment will begin in week 4 of Term 4 2020. Given the dates here, that means that there's going to be a period of time at the end of Term 3 for teaching, a significant period of time, so in that lead up to the EA. But that's all part of that, as well as the beginning of Term 4, that's all part of that planning that people will do. The QCAA are currently developing and will release mock assessments for all of our new syllabuses. These will be available, it is anticipated by midway through next year, and they also are, we encourage you to engage with those. They have been developed with the same rigorous practices as the real assessments, which students will sit the following year. So these dates are important and they for the initial years of implementation. Now, these teaching, learning and assessment plans, you've probably actually have nightmares where somebody's asking you where is yours, and they'd like to see it, and they'd like to see it soon. So we have taken teaching, learning and assessment plans out through our professional syllabus implementation workshops. And one of the things I wanted to talk about today with Unit 4 is that a really effective activity. Oh, we've just released Unit 4. It actually, I should say, was just released yesterday on the portal. Obviously, in anticipation of today, many of you will want to open it and look at it and explore it tonight instead of watching television or anything like that. So the thing that I did want to highlight with everyone is we're talking about backward mapping and we're talking about capacity building. So it is valid and valuable to put Unit 2 and Unit 4 together and to hold them up against each other, because what we should see is that Unit 2 is an intentional stepping stone into the work of Unit 4. The teachers, creators who developed Unit 2 thought about what students would need to be doing in Unit 4 and made sure that, thank you, Gary, made sure that students had the opportunity in Unit 2 to experience the types of learning that they would go to in Unit 4. Importantly, in all of this, in that continuum of unit development, think about how you will continue to develop and foster a reading culture and a creative and critical writing culture in your classroom for your community of learners. The sorts of things that our teaching, learning and assessment plans have embedded as activities across Units 2 and Unit 4 include some of these. This is a particular focus of the literature course, the use of a writing journal. You'll see in all the teaching, learning and assessment plans that students are continually writing and reflecting on their writing and their reading in those writing journals. Kathy talked about handwriting. It's also a great way of building that handwriting capacity if that's the way you want to use it. Writing in lots of different ways. In classrooms, we are concept mapping, organisation of key data and matter. That's something that we're really comfortable, familiar and strong with. Looking for opportunities for editing and peer review. And don't forget the value of peer review, particularly in a literature classroom where we're looking at the idea of a community of learners working together. So well set up peer review can be really valuable for students, where they're not criticising the person, they're looking at the work with a set of understandings around narrative conventions, structure and style, and they're commenting, for example, on that. Analytical conventions, structure and style, and commenting on that. Importantly, you'll see that both TLAPs have students engaging with a variety of academic, public and other interpretations of genres and texts. Having students debating and discussing texts, that's part of that, helping them to move towards increasing independence and being able to look at their own interpretations. Unit 2, many of you saw in the syllabus PD workshops, was a Gothic unit. Some of you would have gone, oh yes, that will work for us. Others would know, no, that's not ever going to work for our setting. Unit 4 is very much about independence. And when you look at the TLAP, you'll see that in the creative responses part of the TLAP, the students are really looking broadly and widely through a whole range of texts and then coming back to collaborate, share, test ideas, write. And similarly, with the prescribed text, they are looking at that in a variety of different ways. So what's in that Unit 4 TLAP that we've just released? These texts are, but many more. Could I tell you, in fact, that there are 5 plays from the prescribed text list and 11 films or television series in the first part of the TLAP, in the creative part. And I'll go in a moment back to text selection and explore that with you, but the syllabus states that not all of the texts need to be engaged with deeply and fully, and that's very valuable in a culminating unit for creative responses. Obviously, for the analytical response, a single text engaged with deeply is very important. But for that first creative response part of the unit, that's a great idea. Would these work for you? The contemporary Indigenous plays text contains Black Medea, so that's why that one's up there. You can if you want, but of course there's many others that you might want to look at and probably already have looked at. So let's come back to text selection and just revisit as part of that thinking around what our students might be doing in Unit 4. What does the syllabus say? Across Units 3 and 4, students must study at least 6 texts from the prescribed text list. They can study many more if that works for you. With the provisos, as long as the following provisos are met. In literature, they must study all 4 of those bullet-pointed things. So novel, play, poetry, complete film or episode of a television series. One of the texts must be Australian, and the big thing that we know has helped people with their teaching and learning plans is that 3 of the 6 in depth. Obviously with the proviso, Unit 4, 1 complete must be in depth. We know there's a must do for the EA. And now this is some fact finding just for me, and maybe it'll help you for your lunchtime setup as well. Now you may not have decided, so this is not a set in stone moment, but show of hands, which external assessment texts are you considering? Bleak House? Excellent. In Cold Blood? King Lear? Mrs. Dalloway? That Dead Man Dance? The Poisonwood Bible? See a few people going, I'm going to talk to you later. The Quiet American? And The Tempest. So there you have already, you'll be able to find your way to some colleagues at lunchtime. So let's think particularly about, now what are the assessment considerations? Because one of the messages of our syllabus implementation workshops has been backward mapping. What do our students need to be able to do? So, and then backward mapping from there. Hope you got to read the cartoon. So the first thing we would encourage you to do is to engage with the subject matter of the syllabus. Subject matter provided by 3 interrelated areas of study in the syllabus provides the parameters for our teaching and learning and highlights what is meant by a close critical study of a text. Kathy did talk about this also this morning, that students become very familiar with these syllabuses and they and their parents will be looking at the syllabus. So it's really important that students are familiar with the subject matter, because what it actually should do is build their awareness and understanding that what you do every day in class with them aligns to the subject matter of the syllabus. You're doing what it says there, and in fact, you do all of that already. The first piece of assessment in the IA3, the creative response, obviously creative. It has to be an original, imaginative written text. In this culminating activity, our students of Unit 1 are now going to be working with much greater independence. I'll just stop for a moment and let you read. What we know is our students have a high chance of success because of prior exposure that they have already had in their sequence of learning. There's a lovely little quotation at the end to say, but there's some push space here. It's a chance to breathe in the stories of others and breathe out their own. This IA3 provides an opportunity to encourage writing in new ways within familiar genres. For example, perhaps students could write a short story in a new style. Crime fiction, science fiction, something they haven't typically done before. There's plenty of others that you could look at. Or you might want to experiment with a new genre or style. If you look at our portal, you'll see that we have a sample response which is a multi-text narrative, and if you're looking for perhaps a slightly new way of writing imaginatively, please do engage with that. It's an authentic sample from a school, and you can see real authentic student work. The syllabus says that the first piece of assessment and topic 1 that sits within it, creative responses to literary texts. And I realised when I put that image up that it was a bit retro, but that I thought I'm presenting in a digital format, so maybe we're marrying all the ways of working together. So the key word there that I've highlighted again is this concept of purposefully. So students are independently composing their text, but they have to be purposefully manipulating those aesthetic features and stylistic devices to shape their representations. They can respond in any way that's predominantly prose and allows them to demonstrate the assessment objectives. Our literature students will be creators. Those ways of working of Unit 1 are now consolidating. Therefore, they have access to a potentially powerful energy. Rosemary Dobson, another poet from our text list, describes that energy in her poem Essay for a French Class, writing, "I kept that dazzling memory in my pocket and ever am rolling it between my fingers." The syllabus suggests that they could write in these ways. Obviously, our role as teachers is to make sure they are well prepared for whatever role, whichever way they choose to write. This keeps coming up, doesn't it? They should determine a clear purpose or some purposes for their writing, whether to do any of those in their work or perhaps many of those in their work. In Personal Helicon, Seamus Heaney tells us, "I rhyme to see myself, to set the darkness echoing." His is not a bleak purpose, rather, in his rhyming, he's taken back to the dark woods and wells of his Irish childhood. Our students need to reveal in the IA3 the why that shapes their writing. It's a reasonably long task. Compared to our current syllabus, the conditions are bigger. That's something for students to think about as well. It may make our looking for short story, for example, samples easier, as many of those are above the current word lengths of our syllabuses. The second thing students have to do is the critical response to the literary text. Now, this is a really familiar space for us because an analytical essay in response to a literary text is something we do already. In this instance, though, it will be the QCAA that is setting the question and marking. And I would just really like to jump on something Kathy said this morning. Markers. Who are the exam setters and the markers? They are the teachers of Queensland. Please get involved, put your hands up. I was a marker before in the 2016 trial, and I actually loved it because what I did love was that professional experience of being able to, and the privilege of reading the work of students from all over the state. It is great PD. So in terms of that EA, what does the syllabus tell us? It tells us a few things which are important. Let's highlight them in terms of our planning here today. There are 11 objectives again, and I would actually draw your attention to 1 and 6, particularly for the EA, because feedback from our trial exams showed us that we needed to include in those objectives responsiveness to a question or task, that it's important that students look at what's in front of them and are flexible in their thinking in responding to those questions in front of them. The syllabus also has a section on the analytical essay, and I'm sure that you've actually really interrogated that heavily. So in terms of what are the key things to look at, the student response informs the reader of an interpretation of a literary text. Obviously, there's conventions that sit within it. That response, that analytical essay is centred around a thesis or a contention. Some people use that term, and that it works in the same way, and it's the driver of the argument of the essay. And the evidence that students use is so their response is built around references to the text of the close study. We know that the person who will be looking at their exam is somebody who is familiar with the text. So as part of that building their understanding and their readiness for their own independent sense of owning an idea in this EA space, they should be looking widely at a range of published resources around looking at textual, other people's opinions about that text. So essays are great for them to engage with, and interpretations of and responses to literary texts are also very important. What else do we need to consider? We need to consider that there will not be a quotation booklet in the external examinations moving forward. So in our unseen essay, in contrast to the current syllabus, students will not be taking quotations or clean copies of the text in with them. But it's important though to note that for both trials, use of quotations did not necessarily lead to stronger analysis and synthesis of subject matter or a heightened fluid argument. There were examples of standard A responses where students did not directly quote from the text but were able to express in sophisticated ways, for example, the playwright's or novelist's use of imagery and their language choices in constructing representations and perspectives in their own explanation and intimate knowledge of the text. There is nothing wrong, however, with them learning some short quotations, and in fact our interstate colleagues tell us that that's often what they do as well. So there will be no quotation booklet. Let's just explore this a little bit for a little bit longer as well. So firstly, our data showed between the two trials of 2016, 16 had a quotation book, 17 did not. The range of responses was entirely similar. No other jurisdiction offers or uses quotation booklets. Obviously there's a copywriting issue. It does kind of privilege. It's easier to get quotations from dead people, who've been out of print for a long time, than it is with contemporary people. But probably more particularly, the choosing of quotations is in itself a privileging act that somebody's making choices about these are the ones that matter. But a student may not see them as being the ones that matter. And I'm sure that you could appreciate that invigilating examination conditions where students bring their own texts in would also be highly problematic. We don't allow in QCS for students to bring anything into the examination room with them, and that practice will continue. So you've seen this slide already if you've been to a professional development workshop, and the really key thing I just want to highlight again is that in our new syllabuses, teachers in classrooms with their pedagogy are the important link between our syllabus and assessment. Remember at PD we asked people what sort of things you could do in preparing your students for an external assessment space. Our next slide is sort of a collation of those things that people said that they'd want to embed into their Unit 4 planning, but embed it way earlier as well, obviously, because it's part of that continuum of learning. They were probably the key things that came up, and these are some of the things that people talked about, and I'll be quiet for a moment, let you read them through. The really reassuring thing in terms of thinking about the development of your teaching, learning and assessment plans is that most people saw that the things that they would do for an external examination space, they would do in an internal assessment space as well. So there isn't a new way of working for an external examination space. It's the same way of working. The wonderful things people do every day are still the wonderful things people will do. And probably one of the points that I really like is don't kill the essay or kill the text. You know, keeping it fresh for students too, keeping that enjoyment of the text that's in front of them is through those things like debate and discussion is part of that. So what did our trials teach us? Okay, we had nearly 19,000 students and over 200 schools who participated across the 2 years, 400 markers, many of whom would be in this room with us. The first trial, 2 plays, the second 6 novels, and it required students to write an analytical essay in response to a novel. The Chief Examiner of 2017 made the comment that her report does not represent preferred ways of answering questions. A really important thing to highlight is a single response to a question was not published. There are many valid ways for students to respond, but there are some key learnings which I'll share with you, which we did see across those two trial years. So in terms of response to the question, analysis and development, this is what we found. You will get, I know you probably think, oh quickly I want to get that all down, and you will get these slides, but I'll summarise it as well. More effective responses centred on a clear, considered thesis. Those better responses were advanced through reason and they concluded strongly. The less successful responses relied on things like recount and tended to be superficial. And you know, think about, you're probably about to mark right now. That's not any different to what you'd be seeing in your classroom in front of you. Similarly, the more effective responses in terms of looking still under the same heading were well synthesised, they were fluent, and they progressed an argument with a level of authority. And that level of authority is about the student having engaged deeply and knowing the text speaks to them. Cohesive techniques include, but are not limited to, and this is actually a quotation from the examiner's report, the use and ordering of paragraphs, cohesive ties, contextualising phrases, word associations, pronoun references, nominalisation, sequencing, topic and concluding sentences. It should be noted that while paragraphs are needed, no prescribed formula for a type of paragraph was enforced. In terms of textual features, the markers and the Chief Examiner found these things, and again I'll summarise the positive things that emerged from that mark in terms of student responses from the marking operation. Students who were more successful or effective in their responses developed them with emphasis and clarity. Their vocabulary was chosen purposefully, flexibly, and specifically, and they had sustained and accurate use of spelling and punctuation. And again, that's a space we already know and are comfortable with and understand and look for. I just looked at the clock here, which has a completely different time on it, I think. So.
It's 11:20.
Okay, so how long do we have to go? Okay, so we're looking at, it's all right, nearly there. So in terms of, we've been over those assessment considerations and looked at how that shapes some of the things that people will want to do in Unit 4. You've seen this slide before, but I'll just come back to it for a moment. So as our students move into Unit 4, they're at the end of their course. We have looked for ways to build capacity and skill as we've moved through the course. By Unit 4, the community of writers of Unit 1 are more confident in their ways of working, more certain of their style, more articulate in their critical insights. Gwen Harwood shows us in her poetry how our new learning is based on our old understanding. And as she wrote, with some irony and much humour in later texts, she sits in the park wishing she had never written about that dowdy housewife and her brood. Better the memoirs of a mad minx or a high-minded ode to motherhood in common metre with a grand doxology. So such humour has been achieved at the end of her course of study. She has been on that journey and revised and revisited to end up with something as marvellous as that. She also had another one which started with, and I also liked this one, she practices a fugue for pure enjoyment. So after today, there are many other places you can go to get information. So obviously, our website has a great deal of information, and many of you are already there and probably there reasonably frequently because things are getting released all the time. Please do sign up for memos. It's a way of being informed about things. For example, applications for external assessment marking, for other projects that are underway. Could I just take a moment? You probably don't want me to talk about this, but the accreditation courses, you would, I'm sure in schools, there's been lots of talk and looking at that, but we have just released course 5, which is the course for confirmation. And the reason I'd really like to talk about it is because we want as many of our community of practice to be involved in those processes of endorsement and confirmation as they can. You're probably thinking, I just want to get to the end of the year now, but please do consider it when you do have a little bit of time. While school principals and moderators have had access to this document, it will soon be released, and I know that people are actually eagerly waiting on its release. The QCIA QCE handbook is coming out, and it will be released in this term. Obviously, one of the things people want to see that for is to look particularly at that special, what we used to call special provisions, which is now access arrangements and reasonable adjustments, or you may have heard people making pirate sorts of noises. So ARA, which is that section of that handbook. Importantly though, we as the QCAA are here to support and help you. Please do call if you have questions. As I said at the start, Ellen is the contact person. You may have a big or a small question after today. In a moment we'll have some opportunity if you do have some questions in the room, and I'll look at answering those with you now. But if you might want to check something, we get calls all the time. Don't hesitate. You know, if you've got I don't want to sound, we often get people ringing up and saying, I don't want to sound silly, but nothing is silly. If things are occurring to you, please do ask them and ask us about them. So, are there any questions at this point in time that people wanted to ask me? I could recite another poem.
Sorry, I know it's not related to Unit 4.
Yes, that's fine.
On the sample assessment item for IA1,
Yes.
it says that they're allowed to take in 200 words of quotes.
Quote, yes, now that is in the syllabus. It has to be signed by the teacher. So.
And that's because it's a scene?
That's because it's seen, and that's so in that, and also in terms of that developmental nature of the course, that analytical essay, they at that point in time, it's first task, in the Unit 3-4 phase. So yes, they can go with 200 words of quotations signed by the teacher into the examination space. Self-selected quotations too, as part of that concept of increasing independence. They select what they want. There's not a sheet that the teacher gives to them that they all take into the examination space. Steve?
Lisa, with the external exams, will they be written, like the questions be written text specifically, or will they be broad on concepts or syllabus?
They're under development, but given what we did in our trials, that pattern of specific questions, I believe, will continue. Yeah, so that, and that certainly is the framework we're currently working within. Yeah. So, yes.
Ellen, will you be sharing that feedback with the conference?
Yes, these slideshows will come to ETAC and they will release them. So, for example, if there's one you wanted to see, I know English is on right now, you can look at it as well, and also I think and the recording of it also. Yeah.
Guys, you just need to get onto the ETAC website and enter your member login, and if you have issues with that, just get in contact with us through the website.
Thank you. Did you spot those quotations? I told you, I thought there would be a few. There were more than a few.
Oh, there's one to go yet.
Oh, is there?
Yeah. So, okay, let me do my. Okay, and finally, you're invited. ETAC is holding a function, and it's part of our sort of wider sense of celebration of the prescribed text list. We, on the 4th of November, there'll be a screening in Brisbane at the Palace Centro, but there's also a screening at the Gold Coast and the Sunshine Coast, if that's actually closer to you, where you can come and see King Lear. It's a production of the National Theatre of the United Kingdom. Now, an email's been sent to Literature PD participants, but some of you would not have been in that space, so please email communications at QCAA and they'll give you the log on to be able to get a free ticket to that. But watch this space. We're actually looking to have a few more events in the course of next year around some of the things associated with the prescribed text list.
Any idea if there's any way you can access that sort of stuff if you don't have the joy of living in the southeast corner?
And look, I think probably the reality is that that's streamed in live time, and so I don't know whether you can contact Palace and find out if you can connect somehow to their streaming. That would be the only thing I don't know. But I can tell you some of our other activities that we're looking forward to do next year. We want to have both a regional and a metropolitan for everyone. We'll go somewhere with them because, yeah, we are well aware of that. And as you leave, remember the wise words of W.H. Auden. In headaches and in worry, vaguely life leaks away, and time will have his fancy tomorrow or today. I hope the time we've spent together today has been without headache or worry. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. I think what keeps coming back to me is this sharing culture that we're seeing not just among colleagues and fellow professionals, but also the idea of creating that culture of sharing and a meeting of minds within literature classes, which I think for most of us would be, one of the things we're really, really looking forward to. I was going to say you'd start every wandering bath, but anyway, enough. So thank you very much, Lisa. I do have a small gift on behalf of ETAC to say thank you.
Thanks.
We appreciate the support, the continuing support. So thank you very much.
Thank you.